Chapter 57 of Barnaby Rudge. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Barnaby Rudge by Charles Dickens. Chapter 57. Barnaby, armed as we have seen, continued to pace up and down before the stable door, glad to be alone again, and heartily rejoicing in the unaccustomed silence and tranquillity. After the whirl of noise and riot in which the last 2 days had been passed, the pleasures of solitude and peace were enhanced 1,000-fold. He felt quite happy, and as he leaned upon his staff and mused, a bright smile overspread his face, and none but cheerful visions floated into his brain. Had he no thoughts of her whose sole delight he was, and whom he had unconsciously plunged in such bitter sorrow and such deep affliction? Oh, yes, she was at the heart of all his cheerful hopes and proud reflections. It was she whom all this honour and distinction were to gladden. The joy and profit were for her. What delight it gave her to hear of the bravery of her poor boy! Ah, he would have known that without Hugh's telling him. And what a precious thing it was to know she lived so happily, and heard with so much pride (he pictured to himself her look when they told her) that he was in such high esteem, bold among the boldest, and trusted before them all. And when these frays were over, and the good Lord had conquered his enemies, and they were all at peace again, and he and she were rich, what happiness they would have in talking of these troubled times when he was a great soldier! And when they sat alone together in the tranquil twilight, and she had no longer reason to be anxious for the morrow, what pleasure would he have in the reflection that this was his doing, his, poor foolish Barnaby's, and in patting her on the cheek and saying with a merry laugh, "Am I silly now, mother? Am I silly now?" With a lighter heart and step, and eyes the brighter for the happy tear that dimmed them for a moment, Barnaby resumed his walk, and singing gaily to himself kept guard upon his quiet post. His comrade Grip, the partner of his watch, though fond of basking in the sunshine, preferred to-day to walk about the stable, having a great deal to do in the way of scattering the straw, hiding it under such small articles as had been casually left about, and haunting Hugh's bed, to which he seemed to have taken a particular attachment. Sometimes Barnaby looked in and called him, and then he came hopping out; but he merely did this as a concession to his master's weakness, and soon returned again to his own grave pursuits, peering into the straw with his bill, and rapidly covering up the place as if, Midas-like, he were whispering secrets to the earth and burying them, constantly busying himself upon the sly, and affecting, whenever Barnaby came past, to look up in the clouds and have nothing whatever on his mind. In short, conducting himself in many respects in a more than usually thoughtful, deep, and mysterious manner. As the day crept on, Barnaby, who had no directions forbidding him to eat and drink upon his post, but had been on the contrary supplied with a bottle of beer and a basket of provisions, determined to break his fast, which he had not done since morning. To this end he sat down on the ground before the door, and putting his staff across his knees in case of alarm or surprise, summoned Grip to dinner. This call the bird obeyed with great alacrity, crying, as he sidled up to his master, "I'm a devil, I'm a Polly, I'm a kettle, I'm a Protestant, no popery." Having learnt this latter sentiment from the gentry among whom he had lived of late, he delivered it with uncommon emphasis. "Well said, Grip," cried his master, as he fed him with the daintiest bits. "Well said, old boy." "Never say die. Bow wow wow. Keep up your spirits. Grip, grip, grip. Holloa! We'll all have tea. I'm a Protestant kettle, no popery," cried the raven. "Gordon forever, Grip," cried Barnaby. The raven, placing his head upon the ground, looked at his master sideways, as though he would have said, "Say that again." Perfectly understanding his desire, Barnaby repeated the phrase a great many times. The bird listened with profound attention, sometimes repeating the popular cry in a low voice, as if to compare the two, and try if it would at all help him to this new accomplishment, sometimes flapping his wings or barking, and sometimes, in a kind of desperation, drawing a multitude of corks with extraordinary viciousness. Barnaby was so intent upon his favourite that he was not at first aware of the approach of two persons on horseback who were riding at a foot pace and coming straight towards his post. When he perceived them, however, which he did when they were within some 50 yards of him, he jumped hastily up, and ordering Grip within doors, stood with both hands on his staff, waiting until he should know whether they were friends or foes. He had hardly done so when he observed that those who advanced were a gentleman and his servant. Almost at the same moment he recognized Lord George Gordon, before whom he stood uncovered with his eyes turned towards the ground. "Good day," said Lord George, not reining in his horse until he was close beside him. "Well?" "All quiet, sir, all safe," cried Barnaby. "The rest are away. They went by that path, that one. A grand party." "Eh?" said Lord George, looking thoughtfully at him. "And you?" "Oh, they left me here to watch, to mount guard, to keep everything secure till they come back. I'll do it, sir, for your sake. You're a good gentleman, a kind gentleman, you are. There are many against you, but we'll be a match for them, never fear." "What's that?" said Lord George, pointing to the Raven, who was peeping out of the stable door, but still looking thoughtfully, and in some perplexity, it seemed, at Barnaby. "Why, don't you know?" retorted Barnaby, with a wondering laugh. "Not know what he is? A bird, to be sure. My bird, my friend Grip." "A devil, a kettle, a Grip, a Polly, a Protestant, no popery," cried the Raven. "Though indeed," added Barnaby, laying his hand upon the neck of Lord George's horse, and speaking softly, "you had good reason to ask me what he is, for sometimes it puzzles me, and I am used to him, to think he's only a bird. He's my brother, Grip is, always with me, always talking, always merry, Grip?" The Raven answered by an affectionate croak, and hopping on his master's arm, which he held downward for that purpose, submitted with an air of perfect indifference to be fondled, and turned his restless, curious eye now upon Lord George, and now upon his man. Lord George, biting his nails in a discomfited manner, regarded Barnaby for some time in silence. Then, beckoning to his servant, said, "Come hither, John." John Gruby touched his hat and came. "Have you ever seen this young man before?" his master asked in a low voice. "Twice, my lord," said John. "I saw him in the crowd last night and Saturday." Did it seem to you that his manner was at all wild or strange?" Lord George demanded, faltering. "Mad," said John, with emphatic brevity. "And why do you think him mad, sir?" said his master, speaking in a peevish tone. "Don't use that word too freely. Why do you think him mad?" "My lord," John Gruby answered, "look at his dress. Look at his eyes. Look at his restless way. Hear him cry, 'No popery!' Mad, my lord." "So, because one man dresses unlike another," returned his angry master, glancing at himself, "and happens to differ from other men in his carriage and manner, and to advocate a great cause which the corrupt and irreligious desert, he is to be accounted mad, is he?" "Stark, staring, raving, roaring mad, my lord," returned the unmoved John. "Do you say this to my face?" cried his master, turning sharply upon him. "To any man, my lord, who asks me," answered John. "Mr. Gashford, I find, was right," said Lord George. "I thought him prejudiced, though I ought to have known a man like him better than to have supposed it possible." "I shall never have Mr. Gashford's good word, my lord," replied John, touching his hat respectfully, "and I don't covet it." "You are an ill-conditioned, most ungrateful fellow," said Lord George. "A spy, for anything I know. Mr. Gashford is perfectly correct, as I might have felt convinced he was. I have done wrong to retain you in my service. It is a tacit insult to him, as my choice and confidential friend, to do so, remembering the cause you sided with on the day he was maligned at Westminster. You will leave me to-night. Nay, as soon as we reach home, the sooner the better." "If it comes to that, I say so too, my lord. Let Mr. Gashford have his will. As to my being a spy, my lord, you know me better than to believe it, I am sure. I don't know much about causes. My cause is the cause of one man against 200, and I hope it always will be." "You have said quite enough," returned Lord George, motioning him to go back. "I desire to hear no more." "If you'll let me have another word, my lord," returned John Gruby, "I'd give this silly fellow a caution not to stay here by himself. The proclamation is in a good many hands already, and it's well known that he was concerned in the business it relates to. He had better get to a place of safety if he can, poor creature." "You hear what this man says?" cried Lord George, addressing Barnaby, who had looked on and wondered while this dialogue passed. "He thinks you may be afraid to remain upon your post, and are kept here perhaps against your will. What do you say?" "I think, young man," said John, in explanation, "that the soldiers may turn out and take you, and that if they do, you will certainly be hung by the neck till you're dead, 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 and I think you had better go from here as fast as you can, that's what I think." "He's a coward, Grip, a coward!" cried Barnaby, putting the Raven on the ground and shouldering his staff. "Let them come, Gordon for ever, let them come." "Ay," said Lord George, "let them. Let us